Hi, and welcome to the second video in this series taking a look at compassion focused therapy and compassionate mind training. I'm Chris. Before we get into this episode, I'm just going to re-highlight that I'm not an expert, nor am I professionally trained. I'm simply sharing my experience of CFT, what I learnt and how it helps me. So, in this video we're going to explore a key concept of CFT which helped me a lot to understand more about my mental health. And it's the 3 emotional regulatory system model. Now, in the past I've called this model simply elegant, which is not to diminish the science that sits behind it, nor the thinking that's developed the model. Rather, it's taken a lot of neuroscience, physiological and psychological processes and put them together into a model which I think is very relatable and very understandable, and that's all due credit to Professor Paul Gilbert, who developed CFT. In my own therapy experience, this was introduced very simply by starting to draw some circles on a whiteboard, which will become clearer why that was important in a moment. Now, my memory often plays tricks on me, and I like to think that was a defining moment, that light came shining through the window and it was like, this is what you've been looking for. I'm sure it wasn't like that, but I'm also fairly certain that actually it started to click almost as soon as I had the model explained, and the more I read about it and the more I looked into it, the more it just made sense. So let me explain this model as best I can, and that means I'm not going to go into some of the detailed science behind it. I don't think that's appropriate for me to cover. There is a lot of neuroscience and evidence behind this model, which you can take a look at later on. So, in the model we have 3 emotional regulatory systems. We have threat, drive and soothing. So these are typically represented in CFT by 3 colours: red, blue and green. Now obviously this doesn't mean that we've got 3 parts of our brain that are built around those systems. It's a conceptual model to try and bring together some emotions, behaviours and motivations, in fact. And these have all evolved to help us, but in modern life it's very easy for them to cause us some issues as well. So let's work through the model and take each circle one at a time. So let's start with threat, which is represented by a red circle. So back in our history, life was full of real risks to our life, as we wandered around on the savannah in our tribes, and our predictive abilities, which our brain is superb at predicting things, were very much developed on a safer than sorry approach. So if we saw a flash of brown fur to the right hand side of us as we're walking through the undergrowth, our brain would assume the worst. It was our local predator. Now, 9 times out of 10 it turned out not to be the predator, and it turned out to be Ugg, who often messed around in the tribe. And so our threat system could come back down once it had been confirmed that it was Ugg. So let's roll forward to modern times. We've retained that ability to take a safer than sorry approach. It's how our brain is wired around threats. So let's just take an example, and you've probably heard this one before, but you go into a shopping centre and you go into 10 shops. 9 shops are brilliant. In the 10th shop, you stumble across a descendant of Ugg who doesn't serve you particularly very well. The whole of your experience of that shopping expedition is not based on the 9 positive experiences you had. You will talk about and share with people about the poor experience that you had, and that's the one that remains with you. And of course, we live in a world where we have a lot of comparisons in work, in education, social media, so our threat system can actually stay on majority of the time. So back when we were spooked by a Ugg in the undergrowth, we had time for the system to come down. It can often happen in modern life that the threat system continues at an elevated level. So now what we do need to consider is that it is actually trying to keep you safe, but because it doesn't have a chance to reduce those levels or overestimates threats which aren't actually real, it can become unhealthy. So the kind of emotions that we're talking about with threat are anger, anxiety, disgust, and the kind of behaviours are aggression, submission or avoidance. So let's consider the second circle of the model, which is blue, and that's drive. So this is a system that motivates us to seek resources, rewards and pleasure. It includes feedback loops, so when we achieve something we get a feeling of pleasure, which can reinforce that behaviour or activity. So again, it's looking after us and it sounds positive and good, and it is. But sometimes that system can go into overdrive. We can push ourselves too hard, sometimes to meet the requirements of others, and how we feel that we're perceived by others can drive that as well. And as it's a reward-based system, if we fail to meet achievements we strive for, and often we set our goals high, then we can feel like a failure. This is particularly true within kind of perfectionist thinking. And additionally, if those kind of reward loopbacks are based upon external feedback, then we can feel very vulnerable and hurt when somebody doesn't respond as we expected them to, or it doesn't quite work out like we thought we were going to, or if someone questions or criticises us. So the kind of emotions that are associated with the blue circle are excitement, anticipation, joy, behaviours are achieving, consuming and wanting. It's worth stressing at this point that emotions don't arise just on their own in isolation. Most of the time we have a mixture, and it's really important to keep in mind that threat or drive aren't good or bad. They're both essential to us. Perhaps better to view them in terms of their being healthy or unhealthy balance. And for me, what's something that comes out in the model that helps to keep them balanced is the third system, which is the soothing system. So this is typically represented in a green circle, and for me this embodies core part of compassion. So this is a system that I think needs some help, which compassion and mind training actually does look at, and there's some techniques which we'll talk about in a later episode which really do help support this system. The reason I say I think it needs some help is that we're often very good at caring for others, so showing kindness and caring and compassion towards other people. Often, but not always, we can also receive care, compassion and kindness. Not always. And then I think most of us are not very good at actually then taking care of ourselves in the same way, so actually looking after ourselves. I think it's also worth highlighting here that the soothing system is not all about Zen-like calmness. It's about bringing awareness to what is important and what you need to focus on, what is important to you, that will help to take the best care of you. And the reason that we need to do some training around this is that when things are okay, that's alright, we can kind of get on with that. When we hit some challenging times, so when drive is in overdrive or threat is particularly high, it can be really challenging to engage the soothing system. So this can be challenging and emotional work, and this is why we do some of the work that we do in compassionate mind training around building up the support that allows us to engage with some of these emotions. So not to do perhaps some of the avoidance that we might have done in the past. So how is this conceptual model actually useful in terms of day-to-day? So it's often used in therapy and training to help understand behaviours and feelings by imagining what the system states might be in different scenarios, so i.e. what kind of size are the circles. Which is why I mentioned in the therapy session I had, we started to draw circles on a whiteboard. And actually I still do that sometimes, drawing them out, thinking about a particular scenario, and thinking about which of the systems is enlarged and in charge at those different times is a very useful technique. So let me just give you an example, doing this video. So right now my threat system is saying switch off, run out the door, and this is a highly vulnerable position and I'm placing myself at risk. So if I drew that out, big red circle. Blue is probably a little bit smaller, and aside from asking how fast should I run out of the door, it's also giving me some sense of contentment, because this is important for me to do in terms of sharing and raising awareness. So if I start to visualise that, my green circle might be a little bit low. So actually if I start to think about, well, actually, what would I need to do to balance that out? So how would I do that? So the kind of thing that I think about is the soothing system could express to threat that there isn't a real risk here, we've assessed the risk, I'm happy that I'm doing this video, so it's okay threat, there isn't anything for you to be alarmed about. And I also just need to check with Drive that I'm happy with this video, and I'm not going to be dependent upon feedback, and that I'm happy that when I finish doing this video and I've posted it, that I've done a good job. So if you take that example, then doing this video comes from a compassion focused motivational point of view, with all three systems helping me to do it. So in summary, our threat system protects us, our drive system supports us to do the things that we need to do and want to do, and our soothing system is the one that cares for us. I'm always going to try to aim to finish these videos with a recommendation, and this time I thought of something that is freely available and maybe would just underline some of the points I've tried to get across in this video, and that is a free graphic which I'll put the link to in the comments of this episode. It was developed by Dr. James Kirby, who's a well-respected CFT researcher, lecturer at the University of Queensland, part-time podcast legend as well. I think it's a brilliant infographic. He has explained what the three circles are, and he's given a couple of different examples as well. So you'll actually see the kind of difference between a competitive threat response and a compassionate motivation response in terms of the circles. So I hope that's provided a helpful overview. And the next episode is going to cover another core concept of CFT, which is the three flows of compassion. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourself.